Today's story starts with a dying convoy, a storm no ship enters, and one old human warship already waiting inside.
The first rule of Air Exclusion Nebula was simple. Nothing entered, and nothing came back out alive. That was why Commander Mara Vare stopped praying when the last Allied fleet rejected her distress call. Prayer required belief in rescue, and rescue had just been denied by 12 civilizations, 3 military coalitions, and 1 automated mercy protocol that politely marked 2,000 wounded civilians as unrecoverable. The medical convoy drifted inside the red storm with its engines dead, its shields bleeding light, and its children strapped into trauma beds while radiation alarms screamed through every deck. Outside the cracked viewports, enemy drones moved like patient insects, not attacking yet, only waiting for the convoy's life support to weaken enough that the bodies would be easier to collect. Mara understood the cruelty of that choice. The enemy did not want prisoners. They wanted witnesses to die slowly, with enough time to understand that no one was coming. Then the storm answered. It was not a fleet signature. It was not a rescue beacon. It was a single transmission, old, distorted, and powerful enough to punch through the nebula's radiation like a fist through glass. The words arrived in broken translation across every surviving speaker on the convoy, and for 3 seconds no one moved, because a voice on the other end did not sound afraid. This is the human battleship St. Mercy. Hold your position. We are entering the storm. Mara stared at the communication screen, certain the translator had failed. Human vessels did not enter the Vare Exclusion Nebula. No vessels entered it. The radiation destroyed navigation systems, twisted sensor ghosts into false ships, and cooked shield emitters from the inside. Even military cruisers avoided the outer bands. And yet this voice had not asked for coordinates, clearance, threat assessment, or political authorization. It had spoken as if the impossible were only inconvenient. Her junior officer, Ilian, looked up from the failing sensor console with all 4 eyes wide and wet from exhaustion. "Commander," he said carefully, "there is something inside the storm." Mara pushed herself toward the station, ignoring the pain in her side where the last impact had cracked her lower ribs. The sensor image was corrupted by static, but one shape kept appearing between the red flashes of radiation, too large to be a drone, too steady to be debris, and too close to have entered from outside after transmission. It was already there. The realization moved through the bridge colder than fear. For 6 hours, while the convoy had begged the galaxy for help, while Allied command had debated risk percentages and enemy drones had circled closer, a human warship had been hiding inside the most lethal region of known space. The shape emerged through the storm at last, scarred, blackened, and impossibly old. Its armor was burned down to dull gray plates. Its running lights flickered like dying stars. Across its bow, half erased by heat damage, Mara saw the faded emblem of Earth. Then the human captain opened a direct channel, and his voice came through calm enough to silence every alarm in the room. "Convoy Ardent Dawn, this is Captain Elias Rook. We are not here to evacuate you yet." Mara's throat tightened. Outside the viewport, the enemy drone suddenly broke formation and began retreating from the human ship. Captain Rook continued, quieter now, almost grim. "First, tell me who used you as bait." For several seconds, nobody on the bridge answered him. Not because they did not understand the question, but because every survivor aboard the Ardent Dawn suddenly realized the same horrifying possibility at once. Captain Elias Rook had not asked to attack them. He had asked to use them. Mara felt the bridge temperature drop another degree as the implications settled into the silence. Around her, exhausted officers stared at the transmission speaker, while the convoy groaned beneath another wave of radiation turbulence. The enemy drones outside were still retreating, pulling farther into the storm instead of advancing toward the helpless convoy like they had for the past 6 hours. That alone was wrong enough to feel unnatural. Enemy hunter drones did not fear medical ships, yet they feared the human vessel. Mara steadied herself against the console and activated the forward visual feed. Static rolled across the display before the image sharpened just enough to reveal the St. Mercy moving through the nebula. The ship looked ancient, not ceremonial ancient, not museum-kept or carefully preserved. It looked used. Scarred plating covered its hull like layers of old wounds repaired without concern for appearances.
Wait, If the enemy is backing away, what do they know about this human ship?
The ship bore a long black impact scar, nearly half the ship's length, something massive having once tried to tear open, and yet it moved through the storm with absolute certainty. Radiation waves crashed against its shields and split around it like water around stone. "How is that ship still operational?" whispered Ilian. Nobody answered him. Mara zoomed the image further and saw something else that tightened every muscle in her body. The St. Mercy was not entering the nebula. It had already been deep inside it long before their convoy arrived. Its engines were running cold, hidden against the storm. Its weapon systems were active but masked beneath radiation interference. The ship had been waiting in the dead zone silently enough that neither the convoy nor the enemy drones had detected it until it chose to reveal itself. That was not rescue behavior. That was ambush behavior. Another transmission came through. "Commander Marver," Captain Rook said calmly, "your convoy altered course into Exclusion Nebula 17 hours ago. 3 minutes later, enemy drones began shadowing your formation. For Allied fleets suddenly lost the courage to assist you at exactly the same time." He paused. "That coincidence interests me." Mara felt the bridge, watching her, waiting for her answer. The truth was she had been wondering the same thing since the attacks began. The convoy carried over 2,000 civilians, most critically injured from the border bombings near the Carthus corridor. Children, refugees, diplomats, medical staff. There was no military value in destroying them, no strategic value either, unless the convoy itself had never mattered. "We don't know," Mara admitted finally. "Our routes were classified. Only Coalition Command had access." The channel stayed silent for 2 full seconds. Then Captain Rook exhaled softly, almost disappointed. "That narrows it down." Before Mara could respond, alarm suddenly erupted across the bridge. "Multiple signatures," shouted Ilian. Port side radiation veil collapsing. The screen exploded into movement. 3 massive enemy cruisers emerged from the storm, like predators surfacing from deep water. Their hulls glowed red beneath the nebula lightning. Each ship carried enough firepower to vaporize the convoy individually. Mara recognized the design
Now the real fight starts. These humans were ready all along.
immediately. Karen Dominion warships. Her blood turned cold. The Dominion never deployed openly unless they wanted a message delivered to the entire galaxy. One of the cruisers transmitted immediately. "Unknown human vessel." A distorted voice growled across the channel. "Withdraw from the convoy and leave the nebula. This matter does not concern your species." The St. Mercy did not move. The human ship simply drifted between the enemy fleet and the dying convoy like a wall placed gently in front of fire. Then Mara noticed something else. The Dominion cruisers were maintaining distance. Far more distance than necessary, as if they did not want to get close. Captain Rook's voice returned, still calm enough to feel unreal. "That's interesting," he murmured. "They brought heavy cruisers this time." This time, Mara turned sharply toward the speaker. Before she could ask what he meant, one of the enemy ships fired. A massive plasma beam tore through the nebula and slammed directly into the St. Mercy. The convoy bridge shook violently from the shockwave alone. Several officers cried out. Mara instinctively grabbed the edge of the console, expecting the human battleship to disappear inside the explosion. Instead, the blast cleared, and the St. Mercy kept moving. No evasive action, no panic, no visible damage. The human ship continued forward through the burning plasma cloud like the attack had merely annoyed it. Across the bridge, someone whispered a prayer. Then the impossible happened. The St. Mercy powered up. Not suddenly, not dramatically, system by system. Like something ancient waking up, deep red lights ignited across its hull. Massive armored sections shifted
This is not just a rescue ship. This is human ship came for a reason.
from beneath centuries of reinforced plating. The radiation storm itself began bending around the battleship as its engines increased output. And for the very first time since the attack began, the Dominion cruisers started backing away. The first Dominion cruiser retreated only 3 kilometers. It was a small movement by military standards, almost invisible unless someone was watching carefully. Captain Maraver was watching carefully. Warships did not drift backward accidentally. Not Dominion warships. The Karen Dominion had built its reputation on overwhelming aggression. Entire sectors surrendered at the sight of their black cruisers entering orbit because the Dominion did not posture or threaten. It consumed. Every military database in known space described the same operational doctrine: advance relentlessly, crush resistance immediately, and never allow fear to become visible. Yet the cruiser was retreating. Not fast, not panicked, careful, as though the ship ahead of it had changed the rules of the encounter. Without firing a single shot, the St. Mercy continued forward through the storm. Radiation waves rolled across its hull in violent red flashes, illuminating scars buried beneath layers of ancient armor plating. Mara now realized the damage covering the battleship was not random combat wear. Certain sections looked melted and rebuilt repeatedly, as though the ship had survived environments that should have destroyed it years ago. No vessel survived this much damage accidentally. No captain allowed a ship to look like this unless appearances had stopped matching. Ilian swallowed hard beside her console. "Commander, I found historical registry fragments." Mara turned immediately. "From where?" "The St. Mercy." His voice trembled slightly. Most records are sealed, but older Coalition archives still reference the designation. The bridge grew quieter. "What kind of references?" Mara asked. Ilian hesitated. "That's the problem," he said softly. "They don't explain what happened. Entire sections are blacked out." He transferred the partial file onto the main screen. Human vessel designation, St. Mercy classification, humanitarian recovery battleship original launch date, 94 years earlier operational status, retired reactivated, classified conflict associations, restricted survivability index, anomaly. Below the file sat one final note from a Coalition military archive: "Do not engage without strategic authorization." Mara stared at the sentence. Not avoid, not monitor, not negotiate. Do not engage. A new transmission interrupted the silence. This time the voice belonged to the Dominion Fleet Commander. "We are authorized to offer safe withdrawal," the commander announced carefully. "Human vessel. This engagement does not concern Earth jurisdiction." Mara noticed it immediately. The commander sounded nervous now, not openly fearful. Dominion officers were trained too well for that. But the certainty from earlier was gone, replaced by the rigid precision of someone trying very hard not to escalate a situation they no longer controlled. Captain Rook answered with disturbing calm. "You attacked
That changes everything. The dead were not all dead.
a medical convoy carrying civilians." A pause. "You entered a dead zone, Nebula, to do it." Another pause. "Now you're offering negotiations before I've even locked weapons." Nobody on Mara's bridge moved. The Dominion commander responded slower this time. "You misunderstand the situation." "No," Rook said quietly. "I think I finally understand it perfectly." Then the channel closed. Mara looked back toward the viewport, just as the St. Mercy crossed directly between the convoy and the enemy fleet. For the first time, the battleship's full scale became visible. It dwarfed the convoy. Its lower hull stretched beneath the storm clouds like a moving fortress, covered in old impact scars, reinforced weapon ports, and strange external structures Mara did not recognize. Some looked too primitive for modern warships. Others looked dangerously experimental. Then she noticed the markings. Tiny symbols painted beneath sections of the armor. Rows of names. Thousands of them. The realization hit her slowly. Memorials. The battleship carried the dead directly on its hull. "Commander," Ilian whispered, "why would a rescue ship need this many weapons?" Mara did not answer because she had just seen something worse. The St. Mercy had no escort vessels, no support fleet, no retreat route. The human ship had entered the Exclusion Nebula alone against an enemy force large enough to destroy entire colonies. And somehow, the Dominion feared being trapped in there with it. Suddenly another alert erupted across the convoy bridge. "Incoming encrypted burst transmission," shouted the comms officer. "Source: unknown. It's coming from inside Coalition space." Mara accepted the transmission instantly. A heavily distorted hologram flickered into existence above the console. The image quality was terrible, but one detail became visible immediately. Coalition Command insignia. The figure spoke rapidly. Commander Vare, listen carefully. You were never meant to survive long enough for extraction. Someone inside Coalition Command leaked your route intentionally. The Dominion expected your convoy to draw. Static violently consumed half the transmission. Then the figure shouted something that froze Mara's blood. Get the human ship out of the nebula before they realize why it was really there. The transmission cut dead. Silence slammed into the bridge. Every officer stared at the blank hologram. Captain Rook's voice returned almost immediately. Not surprised, not confused, just tired. Too late, he said quietly. Outside the viewport, the St. Mercy's engine output suddenly surged hard enough to light the entire storm blood red. Then hidden structures along the battleship's spine began opening one after another. Missile chambers. Dozens of them. No, hundreds. Mara felt genuine fear for the first time since the attack began. Not fear of dying. Fear of finally understanding that the human ship had not entered the nebula to rescue them. It had entered the nebula because it had been hunting something. The St. Mercy accelerated, not away from the Dominion fleet, toward it. The ancient battleship surged through the storm with terrifying momentum, its engines burning so hot that entire waves of radiation twisted around the hull like living things trying to escape its path. The convoy bridge lights dimmed as interference flooded every system. Static screamed across communications channels. Half the sensor displays died instantly, but the human ship kept coming. Mara Vare watched the enemy cruisers react 1 second too late. The Dominion formation broke apart. That alone was enough to shatter every military expectation she had ever learned. Disciplined fleets did not scatter during first engagement contact. They repositioned, reinforced, adapted. The Dominion especially was infamous for holding formation even under catastrophic losses. Yet all three cruisers immediately attempted independent maneuvering, like prey animals. Direct collision vector. Ilian whispered in disbelief. Commander, the human ship isn't slowing down. He was right. The St. Mercy was charging directly toward the center cruiser, without any visible concern for incoming fire. The Dominion panicked first. Bright weapon signatures erupted across the storm, as all three cruisers opened fire simultaneously. Plasma lances tore through the nebula hard enough to illuminate entire clouds of radioactive dust. Heavy kinetic rounds followed seconds later, slamming into the St. Mercy with impacts that should have ripped smaller ships apart. The battleship endured all of it, not untouched, not invincible. Chunks of armor exploded away from the hull. One external cannon battery vanished inside a fireball. Entire shield layers collapsed under bombardment. And still the St. Mercy continued forward. Mara felt her breathing slow involuntarily. The human ship was not fighting defensively. It was enduring damage deliberately, as if getting close mattered more than survival itself. Then Captain Elias Rook finally spoke again. Commander Vare, he said calmly over the open channel, how much do you know about the Ashfall event? Mara frowned. Very little. Coalition archives are sealed. Of course they are. Another impact slammed into the St. Mercy. One of its side engines detonated in a violent burst of fire, sending molten debris spinning into the storm. The battleship corrected course instantly without reducing speed. Rook continued speaking like the battle around him barely existed. 19 years ago, the Dominion erased a human colony inside this nebula. 8 million civilians. The bridge fell silent. Mara stared at the viewport. The Exclusion Nebula. This nebula. The Coalition called it a tragic military escalation, Rook said. The Dominion called it a necessary cleansing operation. His voice hardened slightly for the first time. Earth called it murder. A cold feeling spread through Mara's chest. The Dominion cruisers fired again. The St. Mercy finally answered. The battleship's hidden launch bays erupted open across its spine. Hundreds of missiles exploded outward into the storm in massive synchronized waves, not flying directly at the enemy ships, but dispersing throughout the nebula itself. At first, Mara thought the launch pattern made no sense. Then the storm changed. The missiles detonated deep inside the radiation clouds, triggering chain reactions across unstable energy pockets hidden throughout the nebula. Entire sections of the storm ignited in violent red lightning bursts, and suddenly the Dominion cruisers lost visibility. "Radiation bloom expanding," shouted Ilian. "Their targeting systems are collapsing." Mara understood instantly. The human ship knew the nebula, every current, every blind zone, every unstable pocket of radiation. The St. Mercy had not entered hostile territory. It was fighting on home ground. Another transmission forced itself through the static. The Dominion commander sounded furious now. "You used the convoy to lure us here." Captain Rook answered immediately. "No," he said. "You used the convoy." The distinction hit Mara like physical force. The convoy had never been the target. Not truly. The Dominion wanted something inside the nebula badly enough to leak classified convoy routes and risk exposing themselves openly. And the St. Mercy had already been waiting for them before the convoy even arrived. A realization formed slowly inside Mara's mind. "Captain," she said carefully, "what exactly were you hunting?" For the first time since contact began, Elias Rook hesitated. Outside the viewport, the St. Mercy disappeared briefly behind burning radiation clouds, while enemy fire tore through the storm, searching for it blindly. The convoy bridge remained silent, except for failing system alarms and distant hull vibrations. Then Rook finally answered. 3 weeks ago," he said quietly, "Earth intercepted evidence that someone inside Coalition leadership sold the location of the Ashfall survivors." Mara's blood froze. Survivors, not victims. Survivors. The Dominion came back to finish what they started. Rook continued. "And somebody wanted us distracted long enough to let them." The bridge erupted into overlapping voices. "That's impossible. No human colony could survive 19 years in the nebula. Why would Coalition Command hide this?" Mara ignored them all, because she finally understood why the Dominion feared the St. Mercy. The battleship was not guarding territory. It was guarding people. Suddenly, every enemy cruiser changed direction simultaneously, not toward the convoy, toward the deeper center of the nebula, toward something hidden. Captain Rook's voice became deadly calm. "There it is," he murmured. Then every weapon aboard the St. Mercy powered to maximum output at once. The deeper center of the nebula was not empty. For 19 years, every official chart had marked it as a lethal radiation pocket, a place where navigation systems failed completely and hull plating weakened within minutes. The Coalition's maps displayed it as a dead zone inside a dead zone, an area so unstable that even automated probes were not expected to survive long enough to transmit useful data. The maps were wrong. Mara realized at the moment the St. Mercy turned its full weapons array toward the burning heart of storm and did not fire. It waited. That was worse. Human restraint in the middle of violence felt more dangerous than aggression because it suggested intention. The old battleship held position between the Dominion cruisers and the nebula core, wounded armor glowing red under radiation heat, engines bleeding plasma from the damage it had taken. But every gun remained locked forward with absolute discipline. Then the storm flickered. For less than 1 second, radiation clouds parted under the force of the missile trigger blooms, and Mara saw what had been hidden behind them. A city, not a station, not a bunker. A city. It floated inside the nebula's central gravity well, built into the broken remains of shattered moon, wrapped in layered shields that shimmered like glass beneath red lightning. Its towers were dark, low, and reinforced, not beautiful in the way Coalition worlds define beauty, but alive in a way every impossible refuge was alive. Small lights glowed beneath armored domes. Docking spires clung to asteroid fragments. Emergency farms rotated behind cracked solar mirrors. It was damaged, patched, and visibly struggling, but it existed. A human city had survived inside the most feared region of space for 19 years. Mara heard someone behind her whisper, "No." The word was not disbelief. It was shame. Because if the city was real, then the lie was real too. For 19 years, the galaxy had mourned Ashfall as a dead colony. Memorials had been built. Speeches had been delivered. Trade sanctions had been negotiated and quietly softened. The coalition had closed the file, sealed the archives, and turned 8 million murdered humans into a tragic historical lesson. But not all of them had died, and someone had known. Captain Rook opened a channel, but not to the Dominion. "Ashfall Haven, this is St. Mercy," he said. "Hostile fleet confirmed. Civilian shield protocol now." A different human voice answered, older, strained, and filled with a kind of relief too heavy to sound happy. "St. Mercy, Ashfall Haven confirms. Children are underground. Medical ward sealed. We are ready." Children. The word passed through Mara's bridge like a blade. The Dominion cruisers pushed harder toward the hidden city. Their purpose was naked now. No more pretenses. No more claims of jurisdiction. No more diplomatic language. They had come to the storm not for Mara's convoy, not for military victory, but to erase living proof that their old massacre had failed, and the coalition had nearly helped them. Mara's hands tightened over the command rail. Her convoy's suffering had been bait, yes, but not human bait. Dominion bait. Coalition bait. A cruel signal placed in the storm to force the St. Mercy to reveal itself, to pull the Guardian away from the hidden city, to make human compassion the weakness that destroyed the last survivors of Ashfall. That was a trap, and Captain Elias Rook had stepped into it deliberately. Mara looked toward the image of the human battleship, and for the first time she understood the name. St. Mercy was not a soft name. It was a warning. Mercy was what humans offered to the helpless. What came for the guilty was something else. The Dominion fleet split formation again. One cruiser angled toward the convoy, likely hoping to force Rook to divide fire. Another burned hard toward Ashfall Haven. The third stayed at distance, charging a spinal cannon powerful enough to crack a city's shield if it landed clean. Rook saw all of it. "Commander Vare," he said over the channel, "your convoy still has functional maneuvering thrusters?" Mara blinked. "Barely." "Good. In 90 seconds, I need you to move behind us and stay there. Our engines are damaged. We cannot match your combat movement." "I am not asking you to match us," Rook said. "I am asking you to trust where we stand." Before Mara could respond, the St. Mercy rotated its damaged hull toward the convoy, exposing its broadest armor profile to the incoming cruiser. It was shielding them with its body. Again, the Dominion cruiser fired on the convoy. The St. Mercy took the hit. The impact ripped across its already burned side, tearing open a long section of outer armor. Fire burst from 3 decks. Emergency seals flashed across the wound. The battleship lurched under the force, but it did not move aside. It stayed exactly where it had promised to stand. Mara felt something in her chest break open, not grief and not hope, but a fierce, painful mixture of both. She had seen alliances abandon civilians because the risk was too high. She had seen military councils argue ethics while ships died in silence. She had watched her own people marked unrecoverable by systems designed to sound compassionate while doing nothing. But this human ship, older than some nations, half-broken and outnumbered, had placed itself between 2 doomed groups of civilians and an enemy that wanted them erased. Not because victory was guaranteed, because retreat was unacceptable. "Move the convoy," Mara ordered. Ilian turned to her. "Commander, if the thrusters fail, then we fail while moving." The bridge obeyed. The ardent dawn shuddered as damaged thrusters coughed back to life. Medical decks protested. Power grids flickered. Somewhere deep in the convoy, frightened patients felt their beds shift under emergency acceleration. The ship dragged itself behind the St. Mercy inch by inch while the storm burned around them. Then the Dominion spinal cannon fired. The shot did not target the convoy. It did not target the St. Mercy. It targeted Ashfall Haven. A white beam tore through the nebula, cutting across thousands of kilometers toward the hidden city. For one impossible second, it looked unstoppable. Then St. Mercy opened something beneath its shattered bow. Not a weapon. A gate. A circular device unfolded from the battleship's front armor, ancient, enormous, and glowing with unstable blue-white light. Mara's sensor screamed as gravitational readings spiked beyond safe limits. Captain Rook's voice cut through the chaos, low and controlled. "Brace for displacement." The beam hit the gate and vanished. For half a second, there was no sound at all. Then the Dominion cruiser that had fired the spinal cannon exploded from the inside. The stolen energy had been redirected straight back into its own core. Mara stared at the burning wreckage, unable to speak. Across the channel, Captain Elias Rook finally allowed one trace of emotion into his voice. 19 years, he said quietly. We had time to learn. The Dominion fleet stopped advancing. For the first time since the ambush began, the enemy hesitated in open space, and the hesitation was louder than any weapon impact. One cruiser burned in pieces across the red storm, its own stolen shot still blooming through its shattered core. The second cruiser drifted sideways with engines flaring unevenly, no longer certain whether it was hunting or being hunted. The third held near the edge of the radiation veil, weapons active, shields unstable, waiting for orders from a command structure that had just watched 19 years of human patience turn one of its strongest guns into a suicide device. Mara Vere understood then that humanity's most dangerous weapon was not firepower. It was memory. The St. Mercy had carried Ashfall's dead across its hull, Ashfall's survivors behind its guns, and Ashfall's lesson inside every system that the Dominion had failed to destroy. For 19 years, the galaxy had treated that massacre like history. Humans had treated it like unfinished business. But victory had not come free. The displacement gate beneath the St. Mercy's bow collapsed back into the armor with a thunderous flash of unstable light. Half the battleship's forward hull went dark. On Mara's sensors, entire weapon banks flickered offline one by one. The ancient ship had redirected a spinal cannon, but the cost of that miracle was spreading through it like poison. Human forward shield grid is failing, Ilian said, voice tight. Their bow armor is overheating. Energy bleed across decks 1 through 6. Commander, they cannot take another shot like that. Mara looked at the image of the St. Mercy and saw what the Dominion must have seen too. The Guardian could bleed. The remaining Dominion cruisers moved at the same time. One angled toward Ashfall Haven again, using the wreckage field as cover. The other turned sharply toward the Arden Dawn, targeting the medical convoy with cold tactical clarity. They had learned something from the last exchange. If they could not break the human ship directly, they would force it to choose which civilians deserved to live. Mara saw the trap forming. So did Captain Rook. Commander Vere, he said over the channel, keep moving behind our starboard line. You are losing forward defense. Mara replied, I know. If we stay behind you, they will keep using us to split your fire. I know that too. The calmness in his voice frightened her more than panic would have. On the tactical display, the Dominion cruiser targeting Ashfall Haven began charging another heavy cannon, smaller than the destroyed spinal weapon, but still powerful enough to weaken the hidden city shields. The cruiser aiming at the convoy opened missile tubes along its lower hull, dozens of warheads armed in sequence. Mara's officers went silent. They all understood the geometry. St. Mercy could intercept one attack path, not both. Then Rook's voice returned on the open channel, not to Mara alone, but to every surviving civilian, every Dominion commander, every hidden human in Ashfall Haven. All hands, he said. Mercy protocol is over. The words changed the ship. Across the St. Mercy's damaged hull, faded red lights turned white. External armor locks blew apart. Sections of plating that Mara had assumed were reinforced shielding detached and drifted away, revealing older mechanisms buried underneath. They were not modern. They were not elegant. They looked brutal, mechanical, and terrifyingly human, built by people who had designed them under siege conditions with no concern for diplomatic approval. Ilian's sensor console flooded with new warnings. Commander, he whispered, those systems are not registered weapons. Mara did not ask what they were. She already knew enough. The Coalition had outlawed certain technologies after the Dominion Wars. Human siege anchors, gravitational snare mines, radiation-fed engine traps, devices too dangerous, too unpredictable, too morally uncomfortable for civilized space to acknowledge. Every academy taught that humanity had dismantled them after peace treaties were signed. Apparently, humanity had not dismantled everything. Apparently, St. Mercy had kept the ugly tools locked away until mercy was no longer enough. The Dominion commander opened a channel, voice sharpened by real alarm. Human vessel, Activation of prohibited systems will constitute a treaty violation. Captain Rook answered without hesitation. You brought warships to murder children hiding in a graveyard. A pause. File a complaint if you survive. The channel cut. Then the storm itself began to move. Not naturally, not randomly. St. Mercy's hidden systems launched hundreds of small black devices into the radiation clouds. They vanished almost immediately, swallowed by red interference. But their effect appeared seconds later. Gravity readings spiked in strange patterns. The nebula's unstable currents folded inward. Radiation streams bent into invisible corridors around the human ship, shaping the battlefield into something no Dominion tactical model could predict. Mara watched the cruiser attacking Ashfall Haven suddenly lose speed. Its engines were still burning, but the ship was being dragged sideways, pulled into a region of distorted gravity that had not existed moments before. Its cannon alignment slipped off target by a fraction, then a full degree, then 5. The shot fired anyway. It missed Ashfall Haven by kilometers and vanished into the storm. The second cruiser released its missiles toward the convoy. St. Mercy did not turn. For one terrible moment, Mara thought Rook had chosen Ashfall over them. Then the missiles curved. Every warhead bent away from the ardent dawn, as if caught by unseen hands. They spiraled into a tight formation, accelerated violently, and slammed back toward the cruiser that had fired them. The enemy ship's shields absorbed the first wave. The second cracked them. The third punched through. Explosions crawled across its lower hull. The bridge of the ardent dawn erupted in stunned silence. Mara could barely breathe. The humans were not blocking attacks anymore. They were teaching the enemy that every shot had consequences. But the Dominion adapted quickly. The damaged cruiser cut power to its engines, broke the gravitational pull, and used emergency chemical thrusters to roll out a trap. The second cruiser jettisoned its missile bays before the feedback explosions reached its reactor spine. Both ships survived, wounded but functional. And now they understood the hidden systems. "They are pulling back," Ilian said. Mara watched the display. "No," she said quietly. "They are widening the circle." The Dominion ships moved to opposite sides of the battlefield, forcing distance between themselves and spreading the St. Mercy's gravity traps thin. Their next attack would come from 2 angles beyond the human ship's immediate control. A precise, disciplined adjustment, the kind a ruthless enemy made after fear sharpened into strategy. On the human channel, alarms began bleeding through Rook's audio. Mara heard voices in the background, fast and controlled. Deck fires, power loss, manual overrides, casualty reports. Casualties. The word hit her harder than she expected. Until now. The St. Mercy had felt like a myth breaking open in front of her. Ancient, scarred, unstoppable. But the voices behind Rook reminded her that the myth was crewed by living people. Old veterans, engineers, medics, humans who could burn, bleed, and die while holding the line for strangers. "Captain," Mara said, "your ship is failing." Rook was silent for one breath. Then he said, "Yes." "You cannot hold both attack vectors." "No." Mara's throat tightened. "Then what is your plan?" Another explosion flashed across the St. Mercy's port side. For a moment, the channel filled with static. When Rook returned, his voice was rougher, but still steady. "To make sure they don't notice the third vector." Mara froze. "The what?" Before Rook could answer, Ashfall Haven transmitted on a private channel. The older human voice from the hidden city sounded strained, but clear. "St. Mercy, underground launch grid is awake." Mara turned slowly toward the main screen. Beneath Ashfall Haven, under the shattered moon, thousands of lights began igniting in perfect rows. The city was not only a refuge, it was a fortress. The surface of the shattered moon opened like something alive. Massive armor plates shifted apart beneath Ashfall Haven, exposing structures buried deep under 19 years of secrecy. At first, Mara Vare thought they were shield emitters or underground hangars. Then the launch silos activated. Thousands. The realization struck the bridge of the ardent dawn in complete silence. Ashfall Haven was not merely surviving inside the nebula. It had been preparing for war inside it. Columns of white fire erupted upward through the storm as missile batteries launched in synchronized waves from beneath the hidden city. The projectiles vanished into radiation clouds almost instantly, disappearing so fast that the enemy cruisers reacted a full second too late. Then the storm detonated around them. The first Dominion cruiser lost its rear shields under a barrage that came from below, above, and inside the nebula simultaneously. The second cruiser attempted emergency evasive burns only to drift into one of St. Mercy's gravitational distortions. Entire sections of its hull twisted sideways under impossible pressure before Ashfall's missiles punched through the exposed armor. The Dominion formation collapsed completely, not because the humans were stronger, because the humans had prepared longer. 19 years. 19 years hiding inside a graveyard while the galaxy believed them dead. 19 years learning the nebula's currents, building weapons underground, turning survivors into engineers, children into technicians, grief into infrastructure. The Dominion had entered the storm expecting frightened refugees. Instead, they had entered humanity's unfinished wound. But even wounded predators could still kill. The damaged Dominion cruiser suddenly accelerated directly toward Ashfall Haven, ignoring St. Mercy entirely. Its engines burned so hard they tore themselves apart, pushing the ship into a near-suicidal charge straight through the missile fire. "He's going for impact," Ilian shouted. Mara understood immediately. The cruiser could not survive escape anymore. Its shields were collapsing. Its hull was failing. So the commander had chosen the only remaining option that might still erase the hidden city. Collision. A Dominion heavy cruiser hitting Ashfall Haven at full burn would crack the moon fragment apart. St. Mercy turned instantly to intercept. And for the first time since the battle began, it moved slowly. Too slowly. The ancient battleship had taken too much damage. Entire engine clusters were dark now. One side of the hull burned continuously from open internal fires. Secondary explosions flashed behind exposed armor gaps as exhausted systems finally began failing under accumulated strain. Mara heard it in Captain Rook's voice before she saw it fully on the tactical display. Port engines not responding. Background voices shouted over each other. Reactor bleed increasing. Structural failure on decks 4 through 8. We're losing spin stabilization. St. Mercy kept moving anyway, toward the charging cruiser, toward the impact path, toward certain destruction if it failed. Mara stared at the tactical projection and realized the impossible truth. The humans were too far away. Even after everything, they still might lose. The Dominion commander knew it too. The enemy cruiser ignored every incoming missile and opened a final transmission across all channels. The commander's face appeared briefly through static-filled hologram distortion, blood running down one side of his neck, eyes burning with desperate hatred. "You hid in your dead world like insects," he snarled. "Now you die with it." Captain Rook answered immediately. "No, just one word. Flat. Absolute." Then St. Mercy did something Mara had never seen any warship do. It shut down its own shields. Every remaining layer vanished at once. The Ardent Dawn Bridge erupted in confusion. "Commander, why would they—" Mara saw it. Without shields, the battleship's damaged engines suddenly flared brighter. Much brighter. The ship surged forward with violent acceleration as every remaining reserve of power rerouted away from defense into raw thrust. The St. Mercy lunged directly into the cruiser's path. The two ships collided. The impact split the storm. For one blinding second, the nebula turned white around them as metal crashed into metal with enough force to deform both hulls instantly. Mara felt the shockwave slam through the convoy despite the distance. Consoles exploded. Officers hit the floor. Gravity flickered across the bridge. Then the light cleared. The Dominion cruiser had stopped. So had the St. Mercy. The two ships remained locked together inside the storm, twisted against each other like dying beasts. Mara held her breath. Then the Dominion ship began powering weapons again. Even after the collision, even after all that damage, the enemy commander was still trying to fire into Ashfall Haven point blank. "Captain Rook," Mara shouted into the channel. "They still have firing control." Static answered her. Nothing else. For the first time since the battle began, St. Mercy did not respond. Fear spread cold through her chest. The battleship drifted motionless against the Dominion cruiser, while fires burned across both hulls. One by one, sections of the St. Mercy went dark. Had the collision killed them? Around Ashfall Haven, missile batteries continued firing, but they could not hit the locked ships cleanly without risking the human vessel too. The Dominion commander understood this. His cruiser's spinal cannon began charging again at near-contact range. Ashfall Haven had seconds left. Then the St. Mercy moved. Not the ship. The crew. Dozens of small emergency hatches exploded open across the battleship's damaged hull. Tiny armored figures launched themselves directly onto the Dominion cruiser using maneuver packs and magnetic anchors. Boarders. Human boarders. Mara watched in stunned disbelief as the veterans of Ashfall crossed burning debris fields manually because their ship could no longer finish the fight alone. One transmission finally broke through the static. Not Captain Rook. A younger human voice. Breathing hard. Laughing slightly. We're aboard. Then the Dominion cruiser's internal systems began failing deck by deck. Weapons went offline. Engine signatures collapsed. Sections of the hull depressurized explosively from inside. The humans were tearing the cruiser apart manually. Mara felt a rising through the terror now. Not because humans were stronger, because they refused to stop. The Dominion commander fired the spinal cannon anyway. At the exact same moment, Ashfall Haven's underground launch grid unleashed its final wave, and deep inside the storm, the St. Mercy activated one last hidden system. The last hidden system aboard the St. Mercy did not appear on any coalition registry. It had no diplomatic classification, no approved battlefield designation, and no clean technical name that civilized officials could place inside a report without flinching. It was older than the peace treaties, older than the rewritten histories, older than a version of humanity the galaxy had learned to tolerate because it smiled politely at summits and signed agreements with steady hands. It was called a dead-hand anchor, and it woke up beneath the broken spine of a human battleship like a final heartbeat. Mara Vare watched every sensor on the Arden Dawn distort at once. Gravity readings collapsed into impossible shapes. Radiation currents bent inward. The storm that howled around them for hours suddenly pulled tight around the locked ships, forming a sphere of pressure around the St. Mercy and the Dominion cruiser. The enemy's spinal cannon fired. The beam left the cruiser's weapon core, crossed less than a kilometer, and stopped. Not deflected. Stopped. It hung in space like a captured lightning bolt, shaking inside the gravity field while the dead-hand anchor dragged every violent force in the area into itself. The cannon beam, the radiation storm, the engine fires, the exploding missile wave from Ashfall Haven, even the Dominion cruiser's own reactor surge, all of it bent toward the same point, the St. Mercy. Ilian looked at the readings with horror spreading across his face. Commander, the human ship is pulling the blast into itself. Mara could not speak. Across the open channel, a voice finally returned. Captain Elias Rook. Weak. Buried under static. Still calm. Ashfall Haven, he said. Hold your shield. The older human voice from a hidden city answered, breaking for the first time. Elias, you are too close. I know. The Mercy will not survive this. For one breath, there was only storm noise. Then Rook said, she was never built to survive forever. The dead-hand anchor reached full power. A blue-white flash consumed both ships. The Dominion cruiser vanished first. Crushed inward by forces it had never been designed to endure. Its armor folded. Its weapons imploded. Its reactor tore open and emptied itself into the gravity sphere before the explosion could touch Ashfall Haven. The St. Mercy held the blast around herself for 3 impossible seconds. Long enough for the hidden city's shields to lock. Long enough for the Arden Dawn to clear the outer pressure wave. Long enough for every child beneath Ashfall Haven to live. Then the human battleship broke. Not all at once. Piece by piece. Its bow split open. Its engine spine collapsed into fire. Armor plates carrying thousands of painted names tore free and scattered into the red storm like pages from a burned memorial. The ship that had crossed death to answer strangers guarded a hidden city for 19 years, and stood between murderers and children until its final system failed, finally began to fall apart. But it did not explode. Even dying, it remained disciplined. Emergency pods launched from the lower hull. Human boarders detached from the Dominion wreckage. Ashfall Haven's rescue craft surged upward through the storm. Mara ordered every remaining shuttle on the Ardent Dawn into the debris field before anyone asked permission. This time, no one waited for a council. This time, no one marked anyone unrecoverable. They pulled humans from fire, from vacuum, from shattered armor corridors and burning maintenance shafts. Some came out laughing. Some came out unconscious. Some did not come out at all. Captain Rook was found inside the forward command spine, alive beneath a collapsed console, one hand still locked around the manual anchor release. When they carried him aboard the Ardent Dawn, Mara stood waiting. For a moment, neither commander spoke. Then Rook opened one bloodshot eye and said, "Did the city hold?" Mara looked through the viewport. Ashfall Haven still glowed inside the storm. Wounded, hidden no longer, alive. "Yes," she said. The city held. Only then did Captain Elias Rook close his eyes. The official reports came later. They always did. Coalition hearings, Dominion denials, emergency policy revisions, names of traitors released in careful stages, public outrage packaged into acceptable language by governments that had once called 2,000 civilians unrecoverable and 8 million humans dead. But Mara's report was different. She did not begin with tactics. She did not begin with treaty violations, prohibited weapons, or the hidden fortress inside the nebula. She began with the moment a dying convoy called into silence, and a human voice answered from inside the storm. She wrote that humanity's strength was not that it lacked fear. Humans feared plenty. They feared losing children. They feared forgetting the dead. They feared arriving too late. But they did not worship survival the way other species did. They did not ask whether mercy was efficient. They did not wait for rescue to become reasonable. And when the galaxy called the living unrecoverable, humans went anyway. The Vare Exclusion Nebula received a new name 6 months later. The Coalition called it Ashfall Protected Space. The humans called it what they had always called it, home. Mara visited once more, years after the battle, when Ashfall Haven's towers had grown brighter and the storm had been mapped safely for civilian passage. Near the central dock, she found a memorial wall built from recovered armor plates of the St. Mercy. Thousands of names remained painted there. At the bottom, newly carved into black human steel, were words simple enough for every species to understand and heavy enough that none of them forgot. They were already alive. So we came.
This is the final card, and I think it will cost them everything.